Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the Saints Insider Podcast. It is Monday, February the 26th. I'm Zach Ewing with Matthew Paris, Luke Johnson, and Jeff Duncan today in the Saints Insider studio. It's the start. I guess it's not the start of the new league year. It's kind of unofficially. The Combine starting tomorrow. The new league year starts March 13th, I think, but this is the first big event that will launch us into the draft season and all of that. So Matt and Luke will be going to the NFL Combine in Indianapolis tomorrow, and all sorts of things will go on.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it'll be a busy news week, I'm sure. Matt and I will be out there chasing the scoops. We'll see if we get any.
A lot of late nights.
A lot of late nights, a lot of sitting at the bar and scoping out who else is sitting at the bar. And,
drinking tonic water.
Yeah.
Maybe a little twist of lime in there.
Just try to
make sure we're staying sharp.
That's right. Stay responsible. Today we're going to talk about a few things. We will do a little Combine preview later. We're also going to talk about Derek Carr's restructured contract, which happened since the last time we podcasted, and the new NFL salary cap, which is good news for the Saints. So lots to talk about. Let's dig into it. We'll start with Derek Carr and a move I think that was expected, Matt. It saves the Saints about $23 million against the cap. And I guess the only way you don't do this if you're New Orleans is if you think Derek Carr you're so convinced that he's not the answer that you just have to get away from him after next season.
Yeah, I mean, the more I looked at it, and I had someone point this out to me, is the way that they structured the contract in the first place. They were always going to do this. They tacked on 3 void years to the end of that deal originally. So the way NFL contracts work, so you can kind of push money into a void year, like as long as there's 5 years left on the deal. So they just basically, the void year was already under contract, but they just pushed more of that money into that next void year that was possible. So they're always going to do it. The question now is, does this increase the chances that Derek Carr's on the roster in 2025? We can debate that. I think so, but they still have some flexibility there if they ever did want to cut bait. But the thing we also have to say is that they like Derek Carr. They want Derek Carr to be their quarterback. So if they have that in mind, then yeah, it makes sense to try and keep him around for 2025 as well when he's under contract.
They technically have the flexibility. They could next year say we're going to designate him as a post-June first cut. Yeah. But in order to do that, they'd have to carry $52 million in their salary cap until June 2nd.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen. I mean, in theory, it is possible. But I have such a hard time envisioning that as a realistic scenario for this team in particular to carry that much money until the middle of the summer. You know, when they're even if the NFL has another salary cap explosion next year and the cap goes up by $35 million next year, I have such a hard time believing that they'd be able to just carry that beyond the summer, beyond where they're adding to the roster. Yeah. So I mean, in all likelihood, he's gonna be their quarterback for at least the next 2 years.
It would almost take something like a new front office to come in and say, we're not going to do things the same way anymore. We're going to blow everything up. It would not happen under this front office.
You could also convert some of his, he has a $10 million roster bonus. You could convert that into another deferred payment to where you're freeing up some cap space in the middle. The thing is, if they do carry that $50 million, they're still going to be so over the cap that you're going to have to free up space somehow without touching that $50 million, and that's kind of where it gets complicated.
And look, I think it speaks to what we talked about before on the program, and that is they're all in on Derek Carr.
They married themselves to Carr.
Anybody, I know there's a segment of the fan base that's not all in on him, but the organization is. And so that's probably what led them to overhaul the offensive coaching staff. They've got to get the most out. When you make that big of an investment, and you're taking up that portion of your salary cap at the premium position, you got to make it work. And so they've got to get more out of him and this offense, thus the offseason changes. And if you're not on board with Derek Carr, some guys in the locker room weren't, then you got to move on from them too, because this is a Derek Carr-led roster right now, and I think it's clear in the way they're investing in him.
Yeah, and I think that this is all a conversation that's based on what happened in the 17 games he started, which I think you could say probably half of those starts were good, half of those starts were not so good. Some of those starts were really bad. But I think if they're making all these offseason hires to this coaching staff to try to maximize Derek Carr and get the most out of him, I think he could be a much better version of the player we saw last year. I think that is completely reasonable expectation. Is he going to just post the numbers he did over the last 4 games, over 17 games? No. But could we see the best version of Derek Carr that we've seen? I think it's totally possible. He's been in the same offensive system his entire career. You're giving him something new, something that has historically maximized quarterbacks' abilities. I think we could see a much better version of the player, and this conversation be completely moot next year. And the fan base will start to kind of turn back over onto his side a little bit. Also possible it could just completely crash and burn, and then that's where we have the conversations about maybe it's time to blow up everything. If you're designating him a post June 1st cut and you're carrying that big cap hit, you're blowing up everything.
I mean, Carr has been playing long enough to where his weaknesses as a player, I think, are going to remain. Like, I know they solved a lot of their red zone stuff last year as the season went on, but if you told me he struggled in the red zone again next season, I would say that's probably the guy Derek Carr's always been. It's more so, how are you tapping into those advantages? You know, he's a really good play action quarterback. Do they call that more? Do they just build in? Jeff, I know you've been talking about what stuff do they bring over from the old offense. I feel like they brought in a lot of quick stuff last year that got him into a rhythm. Do they tap into more of that? It's just really kind of balancing his strengths and weaknesses, and that's, I think, why you brought in a new coaching staff, is so, you know, you can better play to those tendencies and every player's tendencies, frankly.
Yeah, and I think the biggest key for the new staff, and I know we're kind of getting off subject here, but
That's what we're here for.
I mean, I really think fixing the running game, that feeds into what Luke's saying. I mean, that's going to make him a better quarterback.
Yep.
I mean, he doesn't have to. I mean, that's all we heard was he can just play his role. He doesn't have to carry the team. And then we didn't have a running game. You know, and the offensive line was struggling.
Defense wasn't as good as anticipated, yeah.
So I think all these things will make him better, but I especially think just looking at who they brought in on the offensive coaching staff, listen to what DA said in the offseason, fixing the running game's got to be their top priority, and that's going to make Derek Carr much more productive.
We kind of got the full Derek Carr experience a little bit. I mean, it was ups and downs, and the fan base was frustrated and like downright pissed off at times. And then you look at the end of the year and you look at the numbers and you say, well, statistically, he was probably a top half quarterback. I mean, the numbers weren't bad. We also need to remember Carr was hurt 3 separate times, and his 3 worst games of the season easily were the week after he got hurt, or the game after. In one case, there was a bye week in between, but it was the game after he got hurt. And so does that factor into this? Could he have been even better had he not gotten hurt?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure he could have, but like you can't. Like that's one of those things that's it's going to be a year by year.
Can't guarantee he won't get hurt next
exactly.
year.
Yeah. I mean, he has historically. I mean, I think one thing you can say without doubt is he is a tough football player. He's willing to play through some stuff. Maybe there's some stuff they shouldn't have let him play through. But I don't think you can say, well, if he's healthier next year, because you just never know how that's gonna play out. But I just think that the stuff they have done this offseason is, as Jeff has said, is just to try to tap into all of his strengths, minimize his weaknesses, give him some more help. And look, it may not be. Like he may not be a top 10 quarterback if he's like number 11, number 12 over the course of a full season, and not just like, you know, number 2 a couple weeks and then number 28 a couple weeks. I think you're feeling pretty okay about your chances.
Yeah. I mean, 14 teams make the playoffs, so if you have a top 12 quarterback, the rest of the roster is veteran, pretty talented at some spots, you should make the playoffs. So that's the goal. The other news that came out the same day that the Saints restructured Derek's contract was that the salary cap for the 2024 season will be $255.4 million, I think it is, which is an increase. Obviously, they increase almost every single year, non-COVID, but this one went up even more than expected. Do you guys think that changes the way the Saints attack this offseason?
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and that's the thing is they go into every year anticipating a bump in the cap. They just never know how much it's going to be, right? So like they could pretty reliably predict about a $10 to $12 million increase every year, and then last year we saw kind of, I think it was like $16 million jump last year, and then this year it's almost double that, $30 million jump. So that's a little bit more wiggle room than you were anticipating, and I think it gives them a chance to say, okay, like, do we want to add to this roster, or do we want to get kind of a little bit closer to like the bottom third instead of the bottom in terms of like negative cap space we have to deal with every year? I mean, they can take this a couple different ways. I think the three of us, Matt, this is your first year dealing with all the Saints cap stuff, but I think we could probably reasonably guess that they're going to see this as an opportunity to be even more aggressive and add to this team because they still think that they are a contending football team.
Yeah, there's also some flexibility there, though. If like now you don't necessarily have to touch Ryan Ramczyk's contract or Alvin Kamara, like you have a little bit more flexibility of the types of moves. Like you don't have to. It's either not all or nothing. You can create money like elsewhere on the roster, and you can still, I think, be aggressive and maybe not touch Ramczyk's deal,
right.
for instance. Like the reason the $30 million is so important is that it just frees them up to do maybe what they want to do without having to sacrifice for the future as much.
Yeah, the COVID year was a perfect example of that because they were anticipating the cap was going to go up another $10 million. Instead, it dropped by $15 million. So that's like $25 million that they had to all of a sudden come up with, according to their year-by-year plans and their forecast for this. So they were forced to restructure contracts that they maybe otherwise wouldn't have had to touch. This is, as you're saying, an opportunity for them not to do the things that they would otherwise have to do.
And we've heard Loomis say recently, I know he said it last offseason, that he's trying to get a little more closer to the mean, trying to not.
We'll see.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. Now he's got it's like his credit card limit.
It's one thing to say it. It's another thing.
Yeah, all of a sudden he's got more money to spend. Is he going to do that or not? Because they've got, like y'all said, more wiggle room.
Yeah, he might be considering a trade back in the draft.
They're no longer last in money owed to get under the. They have $40 million left. I think the Bills are underneath them. They're second to last now. So. Great job.
Moving up in the world, number 31. Saints Insider Podcast is on the Saints on NOLA.com YouTube channel. We encourage you to subscribe to the channel. It's free to do so. Get first access to all of these podcasts. You also get some other videos we shoot at practice and interviews and things like that when they're going on. We'll continue to roll through the off season and into the season. So subscribe. Also, if you're willing to put a little money behind it, NOLA.com/Saints, you can read all of our work as well, and all of our analysis and those sorts of things. Moving into the combine, guys, because you mentioned, this does change the way they can attack this offseason. So maybe it changes. Could they maybe make a luxury pick in the draft instead of a pick they need if they're going to go after a free agent? I mean, all of a sudden it could open up more possibilities. But Luke, you wrote a little combine preview that was in the Times-Picayune yesterday and is on NOLA.com/Saints. What do you expect the Saints are focused on this week? Or is this more just let's open our eyes wide and see everything there is to see and then decide what to do?
Well, I think it's that. But I think there's an understanding that there are ways to upgrade your roster at premium positions, and the best way to do that is through the draft. If you get a guy who plays a very expensive position, offensive tackle, defensive end, corner, receiver starting to become that, you draft him in the first round, you have 5 years of control at a relatively affordable cost compared to other players' salaries. So I think you go into it with the open mindset and you're like, hey, who are the best players? Let's really start assembling our draft board. Let's get with these guys in interviews. Let's do all of our background checks on them. But let's go into this understanding that, hey, we're kind of weak at tackle. We're kind of weak at rush end. We could probably use another receiver. These are positions that are going to cost a lot of money. We don't have a lot of money. Let's use our premium picks on those types of players. So, yeah, I think it's totally possible that in April, we're talking about them picking, a safety in the first round, right? It's totally possible. They surprise us every year. But I do think that there are going to be a lot of eyes on those defensive ends, those offensive tackles, guys at positions of need.
One thing you keep seeing in the mock drafts, still kind of persistent, is the Saints might take their quarterback of the future.
Yeah, I don't think that's happening.
That's something that strikes me, and it tails into what you were talking about, Jeff. They're committed to Derek Carr at least for one more year, probably more than that. I don't think that's the right thing to do.
And I also think they like Jake Haener a lot, as a grooming him to be a backup. I know they like him a lot, so they just use a draft pick on him. And I think this team has too many other areas they have to address. But, we'll see what happens here over the next few weeks through the course of free agency and the movement. I'm really intrigued to see, we always knew Sean Payton. He kind of reflected his personality in the offseason. They'd be bold. They do some kind of off-the-cuff things, kind of out of left field. And that's not Dennis Allen. He's definitely more conservative. I think Mickey Loomis, to some degree, is that way as well. But I felt like after the season ended this year, we might actually see more changes because of it felt like the roster kind of reached a crossroads in some respects. It's going to be interesting if they've just been laying low, waiting to make these moves, heading into free agency, heading into the draft, or are they actually going to pull back and remain conservative and not make a lot of changes? I'm really intrigued to see what you guys come up with next week as agents start meeting with the front office execs and rumors start leaking out about possible movement of either cuts or potential trade targets leading into the start of the league year, because I felt like we were trending that way, and it's been all quiet on the Western Front for the most part the past few weeks.
Yeah, the other thing about this combine, too, is they're going to have to scout with – they know Clint Kubiak is in place, so now they can kind of tailor to the roster a little bit more to his preferences. You had a chance to look at players at the Senior Bowl, but they didn't have they didn't have an offensive coordinator in place. So now that you have that clarity, you have a little bit better of idea of what types of players you're looking for. And I think the more I look at it too is the Saints are in a really, I think, fortunate position to be picking at 14 with the way this draft is expected to shake out. You have 4 quarterbacks probably expected to go in the top 8 picks. That puts the Saints in a fortunate position to where if one of the top tackles falls, if one of the top edge rushers fall, they're still right there to get a premium player.
Yeah, I think if you look at, and again, mock drafts are about as valuable as the paper they're written on,
especially in February.
Yeah, but it looks like quarterbacks and wide receivers are going to make up the bulk of the top 10. And so if that's the case, and the Saints could use a wide receiver, don't get me wrong, but if that's the case, it may play into your hands that one of those linemen that you covet, and Luke, you had a list, another story on NOLA.com of, I think it was 9 guys who they could target, and they were all offensive linemen, defensive linemen, or pass catchers, wide receivers or tight ends. And those are the guys, I think, if you're going to turn the combine on TV this week, those are the guys to kind of pay attention to.
Yeah, I think so. Dennis Allen has been pretty upfront about how he thinks a team should be built. It's from the lines out, right? So I think it's pretty clear if you look at last year's team that the defensive ends had 14 sacks for last year's team, and Carl Granderson was responsible for almost 9 of those, 8.5. I mean, they need some juice there. Even if you are thinking you can get more out of Cam Jordan as a pass rusher and get him to finish a little bit better, you still need some juice there. And they've kind of whiffed on some high profile draft picks or guys who just they've been too hurt to play like Peyton Turner, or they weren't ready to play like Isaiah Foskey. I think you need some immediate help there. The interesting thing will be to see how much, if any, they deviate from kind of their chosen path with these guys. There's some guys that are ready built who are like prototype Saints. Jared Verse, big, long, explosive, productive. He's any of the last 5 years, you would have been like, that guy they're going to make a move for that guy. Clear. But I think we saw this stuff with Zach Bond last year, and their considerations of using like more of a sub pass rusher type, a guy who doesn't have to fit their usual mold. I think you look at a guy like Dallas Turner out of Alabama, who's still long, still very productive, but not as thick as some of the guys they kind of traditionally prefer. You think maybe he could be an option there. I mean, he's probably the best pass rusher in this draft. Leatu Latu. I'm hoping I'm saying that name again.
Sounds
right?
good.
Sounded
good.
Yeah.
UCLA defensive end. I mean, he might be another option, even though he's not like as long as their typical guys. A guy had 23.5 sacks in 2 years at a big time program. you know, and then, you know, obviously offensive tackle. I mean, we've been talking a lot about Trevor Penning and how I don't think it'd be wise to just like bank on him to be ready to be your starting left tackle week one. You know, I think there's going to be a lot of guys who are going to be there because of what we're talking about with the receivers and quarterbacks at the very top of this draft. You could potentially have your choice out of the top 2, 3, 4. You know, one of them is probably going to be gone for sure, but 2, 3, 4 might be there. You'd have your choice out of those guys. And then, you know, the wide receiver thing, you know, it's not how I would do it. But you got Clint Kubiak. You want to maximize Derek Carr. If there's somebody truly special there who you're not anticipating, I really like Roma Dunze. I think he'd really fit well within this offense. I mean, I think Brock Bowers as a tight end is the only guy I'd consider taking that high in the draft. But you know, he could be like a difference maker type of weapon that's different than what you already have on the roster. I mean, there's a lot of different ways they can take it, but I'm still all about building up front because they really need a lot of help there.
And what you mentioned is that the Saints have traditionally valued size and athleticism in the Mickey Loomis era, and you could almost pinpoint. I mean, you could look at certain guys; they're just not going to draft him. He's not big enough.
Yeah,
his athleticism score is not high enough. Yeah,
or like Nolan Smith last year. I remember people were getting up in arms because they took Brian Brzee over Nolan Smith. Nolan Smith was this edge rusher from Georgia. He weighed like 230 pounds. I was like, there's no chance they would have ever taken him. That's not who they are.
Yeah, but combined with what you're saying and what Matt's saying about Kubiak, maybe we see you're not going to see wholesale changes, but maybe some slight changes.
Yeah, I think, and we've heard both Dennis Allen and Jeff Ireland talk about this. They're going to tailor their personnel acquisitions toward their scheme. And it's a different scheme than what they've been running, even though it's probably going to be a little bit of the same. You know, they're going to find the guys that work in that offense.
Look, I think it's going to be interesting, too. Hopefully you guys get an audience with Clint Kubiak. It sounds like that might happen in Indy, but also some of the other offensive coaches, since it's all new blood coming here for the most part, and you all get a chance to visit with them and kind of get their view on what they're looking for, what they see in the offensive line, as opposed to what the old scheme you looked at. I think it's going to be invaluable in that regard. We're going to get a lot more sense of direction into where this team's going after you all get a chance to visit with those guys.
Yeah. And going back to the tackles, too, you know, Daniel Jeremiah held his like pre-combine media call with a bunch of beat reporters, and I had a chance to ask him about kind of the tackles and the run. He mocked the Alabama kid
J.C.
Latham to the Saints at number 14, and he said that's about the range where the top tackles you could still get a premium run. He expected Joe Alt to be gone. I think he's regarded kind of as the top tackle, him or the Penn State kid. Those two will probably still be off the board.
You're not going to try the name,
but
the Penn State kid. That's
Fashanu. Let's just go with that one. Yeah.
But they still have some. He mentioned that some of his like eyes for Latham specifically, like maybe aren't where you would want them to be as a top tier prospect. But I kind of asked that in relation to Penning, and he said the interesting thing about Penning is if you look back at it, he was so over aggressive as a college prospect that's kind of hurt him in the pros. Is you can be maybe a little bit more over aggressive in college, but you can't do it as much in the NFL. So I thought that was an interesting answer as it relates to Penning anyway.
Yeah, if I'm the Saints and I'm targeting offensive linemen, I want a sure thing. Like I don't want a project or even if I'm giving up a little bit of upside, I need somebody who can come in and I know is going to be solid right off the bat.
Yeah, you know, in that same conversation with Daniel Jeremiah, he used to work in the Ravens organization. He had a great line. Yeah. He said Ozzie Newsome used to say, in the first round, we want to hit all doubles, and we don't want to strike out. And I think that's a great philosophy. And I think the Saints actually, for the most part, have done that until recently.
Last 3
you know, like
years,
you would
maybe?
consider, I would consider Andres Peet maybe a triple, you know, but like fans don't consider Andres Peet, but that's a double.
He's been a starting lineman for 9 years in the NFL.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what you want out of your first-round draft pick. He's not a bust. He contributes. But that's what I consider to be a double, is a starting caliber player that has a very high floor. And I think the Saints definitely need that right now. They can't afford any more of these Peyton Turner type reaches. And I think that was somewhat a byproduct of the way Sean Payton ran the team. He was willing to roll the dice. Sometimes it worked. sometimes it doesn't work, and they've been on a run of it not working lately.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think even trading up for Chris Olave in 2022 is kind of that sweet spot, right? You're still aggressive, you're going for it, but he's a very high floor player, and he's been that. I mean, he's probably a triple as well for what you look for in a prospect. So, I think some of those tendencies, even with Sean Payton gone, are still there, but yeah, that they need to hit on this pick for sure. Anyway,
They've kind of taken some high risk picks in the top part of the draft, the first round, especially in the last couple of years. But I think they've balanced that out by looking for high floor guys in the middle rounds. I think that's actually been where they've been most successful. Is in the second, third, fourth rounds, finding guys who are big time contributors, whether it's Eric McCoy or
Pete Werner,
C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Alontae Taylor. They've been really, really good in those middle rounds, finding guys who are okay. These guys all have the traits we like, but they were high level contributors, and we're not like gambling on like, okay, if you take these traits and add a little bit of coaching to it, what can become of it? And that's kind of circling this back to the tackles. I think one of the more intriguing prospects in this class is Georgia tackle Amarius Mims, who I think had like 8 starts in his college career. It was all last year. He got hurt. He didn't play the full year, but he's like the classic Saints pick. He's like 6'7", 340, super athlete, but you're kind of gambling on the traits a little bit. It'll be interesting to see kind of where he lands on their board, considering some of the recent picks.
Yeah, and I think Jordan Howden fits kind of into that same mode.
Yep.
Mid-round pick. You know what you got with him. Probably never going to be a Pro Bowler, but solid starter.
Contributing player in the 5th round. It's pretty good.
And I think you could argue also when they took some of these risks, they were in a different place than they are now.
Yeah.
I mean, that was back when Drew Brees was here, when they took Marcus Davenport. They could afford to swing for the
They're
fences.
just filling out some spots, and you're going, well, if we can get an absolute star,
right?
And if he's a bust, oh well, we still have a good team. You're not this much different.
So it's a little bit. The problem though is that for Marcus Davenport and for Trevor Penning, you're talking about giving up trade assets to take that grand slam swing, and if you miss on it, as they did on those 2 players, it looks really bad. And I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes is some of these guys that haven't panned out, they paid a really, really high price for.
Yeah, and I'm still not ready to give up on Penning.
Me either. I
feel like Penning's a salvageable guy. Let's see what happens with this new staff, new scheme, maybe newfound confidence. It sounds like they're going to send him to Duke Mayweather this offseason, work on his game. Now, I think he has to own some of it as well. From what I understand, wasn't the greatest student of the game. Wasn't buried in the playbook, didn't take to some of the hard old school coaching of Doug Marrone. So let's see if he has a little bit of a wake-up call this offseason, because clearly the guy's got talent. I mean, the big-time talent.
Undeniable.
So let's see, maybe he moves to guard, but I think they've got something there. It's an asset. They've got to tap into it.
All right, we'll kind of wrap this up, and then we'll have plenty of podcasts about the draft as we go into the spring. But I'm curious if you guys have an under-the-radar name you're keeping an eye on this week. Maybe, not a first-round guy, but the Saints have, I think, pick 45 in the second round. It's the Broncos pick. They don't pick them. Those might be their only 2 picks in the top 100.
They'll get at least 1 third-round compensatory pick, which is it probably won't be in top 100.
Yeah, it'll be right around the early hundreds. Yeah,
105,
something like that. So they're not going to have a lot of opportunities to draft these guys who are invited to the combine, but who's got an under-the-radar name? Maybe you're, I don't know, a Puka Nacua from last year, Luke.
I was right about that.
You were. That's why I'm asking you.
Do a search on Twitter by Luke Johnson, Puka Nacua.
Expectations are now high.
There's one tweet, but I said I like this game. It counts. I should be an NFL GM.
You're not like the Fletcher Mackel, though, who just throws a million things out there. And
That's right.
When you hit on one, you brag about it.
No, that's right. That's right. I was also high on Dontavian Wicks last year. I felt pretty good about that. Okay. I'm going to go with another wide receiver. Actually, played in your home state, or not your home state, but your alma mater's home state. Ryan Flournoy, a receiver from Southeast Missouri State, who kind of bounced around lower level college football. Played 1 year at Southeast Missouri State and killed it. Hugely productive, big body. Played at the Senior Bowl, and I think he was on Bruce Feldman's Freaks list. So I highly anticipate him to go out there and light it up at the combine. I think he's just going to be a name we hear a lot about in the next week or so.
Love it. Love the SEMO grad.
Yeah. I knew that was going to resonate with you.
Cape Girardeau, baby. Matt, you got
That
one?
doesn't resonate.
No, it didn't.
Tyler Hansbrough's from down
Not
there.
as committed as that. I think Patrick Paul's really interesting. He's a tackle from, I believe, Houston or Louisville. Yeah, Houston. It all goes back to Washington. His brother, Chris Paul, was drafted by the Commanders.
Drink.
So got it in. But he's a real. If you're looking for maybe a tackle that is past the first wave, like let's say they draft a pass rusher in round 1, I think he's a guy that is kind of interesting, big for the position. Had a nice Senior Bowl apparently. That's kind of the guy that maybe in the second or third round that he'd still be there. A little bit of a project, but I think he could hold up.
Jeff, you got one?
Yeah, oh yeah, Daniel Jeremiah mentioned this guy too. He's, I think his name's Malachi Corley,
Yep.
Yeah.
Western Kentucky grad, my brother's alma mater. Shout out to the Hilltoppers.
Robin Fambro's alma mater as well.
Correct, yeah, great journalism school. But also this guy's big yards after catch monster. I think his own nickname he gave himself is the Yak King, and we know that's a big facet of the scheme they're bringing in. I think they could use some of that. Works mainly out of the slot, kind of fits in a lot of ways. Not your typical Saints type receiver though. He's kind of a bowling ball, kind of a Steve Smith type build, but does have a skill set that they could use. And I do think they'll look for a receiver in this draft. Maybe not high, but it sounds like a very good draft from everything you're hearing for like third round receivers. And that would fit probably in the Saints' plan, I think.
I was going to bring up Corley too, actually, because I think he's got that skill set that you're talking about, where you're not going to put him on the outside and ask him to go beat somebody in man coverage, but he is built like a running back, and that makes me think of Deebo Samuel, who's built like a running back and plays running back in that 49ers scheme. Somebody you can kind of move around the field and take advantage of the diverse skill set. Maybe he doesn't have the like super elite trait, but he is probably like a turbo version of Lynn Bowden.
Yeah, exactly. And the guy I'm really interested in watching this coming week is Mason Smith, the LSU defensive tackle. I mean, this was a guy that when he came out, he was like a uber recruit.
Yeah.
And he looks the part. He's the get off the bus team, 6'6", 300.
Yep.
But after that injury, that freak injury he had against Florida State, he wasn't the same player this past year. But maybe it takes, sometimes it takes these big guys a while to come around. He's certainly got potential, and I think this is a huge combine for him. So
And maybe you get a discount on a guy like that because of the uncertainty.
And the Saints have done that kind of stuff in the past, taking these kind of guys that have had either injury or something that's caused them to trickle down the draft board, and they think we get them in there with some coaching, some development, we can tap into that, what would have been first-round type of talent.
Mason Smith is a giant human being.
Yep.
I have a feeling he's going to, if he's all the way fully recovered, I think he's going to do some crazy things at the combine for defensive tackle.
Yeah, somebody's going to think I can get something out of that guy because there's just not. I remember Mike Ball, the Saints, one of their oldest scouts on the roster, most veteran scouts. He used to always say, God only made so many big men that can move. So that's why the Saints value these offensive linemen, defensive linemen in the draft because it's just supply and demand. There's not that many of them.
Yep.
And so a guy like Mason Smith, I think, moves up in the Saints' eyes because of that. This is the way they value big men.
He's a very similar player to Brian Brzee, just in terms of the
Size.
background, the size, the athleticism. Just think you'd probably get him at a discount because Brzee had the college production and Mason Smith did not.
Yeah, this is a great draft from everything. I'm just kind of getting into it now, but it's a great draft for what the Saints, if we looking at their needs, really is.
Offensive linemen, defensive linemen, pass catchers. Yeah.
Pass catchers. Just all the things you think about. Well, they could use some help there. It's a really deep draft in those areas.
Corner is another kind of sneaky spot too.
Yeah, I agree.
Ike Adams a free agent. We don't know what's going to happen with Marshawn Lattimore this offseason. And I don't think that's ever a position where you go, okay, we got our top 3 guys, we're set. Ever.
Yeah, you know what I think they need? The more I look at it, I think they've got a hole on their defense. It's kind of that position, that kind of joker guy that C.J. Gardner-Johnson played, and it's becoming more and more almost like a regular position in the NFL.
Yeah.
With this, we saw how much they struggled defending tight ends last year. They don't really have a good matchup guy for that. They used Ty Matthew for a while on that. They used Alante Taylor. I think they could use almost like a specialist to fit a role, a specific role, in the defense. Jeremy Chin type guy, who's a free agent, by the way. But like, I wouldn't be surprised if they end up bringing somebody in free agency like that or drafting someone, because I think the way the league's going, these athletic tight ends, you need a bigger bodied DB to work in those sub packages.
They have a lot of needs.
Yeah, all good stuff. I was thinking of running back too. I mean, if you don't know what's going to happen with Kamara, Jamal Williams has 1 year left on his deal?
2.
Kendry Miller's been injured his whole rookie year. I mean, maybe this wouldn't be an early round pick, but late rounds.
It's not a great draft for backs, though.
Cody Schrader, man,
Oh, God.
the shredder.
Here we
Take
go.
the Louisville guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jeff Duncan.
Yeah, he's not that big, though. He's small. But I would say, mid rounds, certainly. But I mean, this is not, there's no Bijan Robinson in this.
No.
draft.
And you wouldn't want to take in the first round anyway. So, one of the cool things and one of the reasons we send 2 guys to Indianapolis for this is it's not just to watch guys run cone drills. I mean,
I will watch 0 cone drills.
You will probably learn something about the Saints. We don't even necessarily know what it is, but you'll come back more knowledgeable about the team and the franchise than you are now. Hopefully, that's the hope. So that's all a way of saying that when we come back, we'll podcast more. We'll talk about what you all learned, and maybe we'll have like an all columnist edition of the podcast while they're gone. Dunk.
Yeah, we can do that.
You and Rod in here, and we'll have some hot takes.
Chop it up.
So that's the Saints Insider for today. It's Monday, February the 26th. These guys head to the Combine. We'll have full coverage. Check it out, NOLA.com/Saints. Subscribe to the Saints on NOLA.com YouTube channel. Give us a thumbs up, or if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, reviews are always welcome as well. For Norman Bell, our producer, he's Matthew Paris. Luke Johnson and Jeff Duncan, I'm Zach Ewing. Thanks for watching.